Welcome to our first digital coffee morning. We'd usually hold these sort of events in our libraries, but as we're unable to at the moment, we decided we'd host a virtual event. So we'd like to share with you some of the books we've been reading in our spare time recently, and hopefully it will inspire you to try something new. You may discover a different author. And of course, no coffee morning is complete without a sweet treat of some kind. So we've also been baking as well, and we'll be sharing some of our recipes with you as well. Don't worry if you don't get the names of the authors or the book titles or the recipes as you're going along. We'll recap them at the end of the video. So hopefully you'll join us with your own drink and possibly your own sweet treat as we talk about the books we've been reading. Okay, so Dan, do you want to start off and tell us what you've been reading?
Yeah, I've been reading Primary Colours by Anonymous, or that's how it was originally published. It was actually written by Joe Klein, and it's a sort of political thriller set during a presidential campaign. And I'm reading it because I like American politics, and American politics is big at the moment, so I thought I'd reread it in honour of the latest American campaign. It's actually really quite a good book. It's thinly veiled on Bill Clinton, and the campaign starts and goes horribly wrong when he starts having infidelities, and I feel it really gets across the character of Clinton and the strengths of him, and also the very major flaws. So yeah, that's what I've been reading.
Sounds really interesting. And what have you been baking to go with this?
It wasn't quite to do with this, but the last thing I've baked was blackberry and lemon tart, because it's blackberry season at the moment, and me and my daughter like to go out and pick blackberries, and a couple of years ago I needed to find something to do with them, and I found this recipe on the internet, and it's really nice. And I was quite pleased this time because the tart worked really well. I got the pastry just right, and it's very nice.
Do you make your own pastry?
Yeah.
That's really good. Okay, that's great, thanks. Samantha, what about you? What have you been reading?
Well, I've been reading a lot of crime novels during lockdown, purely because they were the ones that were on my card at the time. But I thought to try something different, so I picked up Wonderful Messy Us by Catherine Isaac. And I was going to say it was a bit lighter, but in fact it's a bit more than a light romance, because it has heartbreak and family secrets, and also a trip to Italy mixed in. And Italy is one of my favourite places to visit, so that was quite good. The main characters, Ali and Ned, have been friends since childhood, and they have on the surface a platonic relationship, but as the story progresses you can see that perhaps there is a little bit more to that, even though they both think that it is platonic. The story develops when Ali finds a letter that seems to contain a family secret, and her grandmother won't talk to her about it, and she is desperate to know because there's questions about her identity. So she plans a secret trip to Italy, and Ned, who seems to be having some kind of midlife crisis, comes along with her. And while they're out there, there's a difficult choice has to be made, but as to, well, I can't really tell you about that because that will spoil the story. But I did like it because I liked the other sometimes you only identify or get to grips with the main characters, but the sort of backstory of some of the other characters was really good, as you got engrossed and you wanted to see how it panned out. And the story is told by Ned and Ali, but there is this third voice that you don't really identify till right at the end, which is sort of telling you how the family secret pans out in it. And then there's other twists as well, so it is quite good.
Sounds interesting.
Yeah, it's always good to have a book with a secret in, isn't it? Those are always the books that keep me gripped to the end. And it's the sort, when you think, I'll just read a chapter before I go to sleep, and then 6 or 7 chapters in, you're thinking, oh no, I'll just read another one just to make sure. So yeah, they're the sleep wreckers, I call them, Samantha, because I can't put them down and go to bed.
Yeah. And
so Annalise, do you think that one Samantha's read, that you'll have a go at reading that one? Does that sound interesting to you?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I think I've told everybody that I do tend to read the sort of lighter fiction, but I do like it to have a hook in it to keep me reading, or else I can't really see the point in reading at all. But yeah, so that sounds a sort of ideal sort of middle ground book that would definitely appeal to me.
Yeah. Okay. Right. Catherine, what have you been reading?
I've been listening to a story. I've been listening to The Doll Factory by Elizabeth MacNeil, and it is a debut novel, and I really enjoyed it, and it's one of the best books that I've listened to for a long time. I liked it because it had got everything in that I most like when I'm reading or listening. It was set in history. It was set in London at the time of the Great Exhibition in 1851, and some of the descriptions are almost Dickensian. It has a lot of suspense and drama and strong characters, and there is some romance as well. The heroine is a young woman called Iris, who works in the doll factory, and she has a twin sister, Rose, and you learn more and more about the sisters' relationship as the novel continues. But Iris is a very unusual character and way ahead of her time in many ways, and she aspires to be an artist and a painter. She becomes the model for a pre-Raphaelite painter, the fictional Louis, and she also learns to paint herself. The suspense and sinister atmosphere is provided by the rather creepy taxidermist figure. Again, he seems rather a Dickensian character, Silas Reed, who very secretly becomes obsessed with Iris, and she knows nothing about him, and he sets a trap, and a lot of the sort of later part of the novel is Iris going to escape with her life or not? So it is quite gripping, and I did have to stop listening to it at one point because I was so engrossed. It was upsetting me, but it is really, really worth a go if you like history and suspense.
Right, that sounds interesting. And what did you bake?
I made some rock buns. I've got one here. That's the last one that's left. And they're just very easy to make and take about a quarter of an hour to cook, and that's it.
Do you manage to make them light? When I made rock buns, they really were rock.
Yes, yeah, these were fine in the end. In fact, it was so good that the dog ate one when I got up and walked off. He managed to knock the plate onto the floor and helped himself, but yeah. Yeah.
Okay, thanks. Samantha, I forgot to ask you what you'd baked.
Well, I actually baked some banana cake, and I must admit, while I was reading my book, I was nibbling on a couple of slices of that. It's a recipe that I got from a friend of mine, and I'd like to say it was a family recipe of hers, but I don't really think that might be the case, but she passed it on to me, and I like it because it's tasty, but B, it's really, really easy to make, because most of the ingredients you just liquidize, and then you just pour it into the flour, fold it all in, and then put it in a tin and bung it in the oven, and then 25 minutes later it's all ready to go. So it is nice and easy. And another benefit of it is it freezes really well. So if to prevent myself from being tempted from eating it all if no one else is around, I often just cut it in half and freeze half of it for another day. And when you defrost it, it's just like, it tastes just almost as good as freshly from the oven.
Is it more like a sponge cake or like a banana bread?
Well, it's probably more like well, it is sort of cakey, but it's a bit heavier, bit more tasty, I suppose, than a sponge cake, and it sort of slices. I mean, my kids like it when it's not quite cooked, so you've got some of the sort of gooey mixture as well as the cake to eat as well. That always reminds me when my mum cooked cakes when we were younger, and they'd gone within sort of 2 minutes of them being out of the oven, because we'd all have the hot cake, and the sort of a few of us, so we would just sort of eat it as soon as while it was still quite warm.
Okay, and Annalise, what have you been reading?
Well, I've read something a little bit different to what I ordinarily would read, because obviously the book that Samantha talked about would be ordinarily the sort of thing I'd pick up. But as I was working at Chesterfield Library, I just literally went downstairs and there was loads of new books out on tables. So I was sort of like a kid in a sweet shop and just was like eyes open wide, seeing, oh, I'll read something different. So I came across How to Build a Girl by Caitlin Moran, mainly because the cover was bright yellow, so it did stick out like a sore thumb. Now, I've never read anything by Caitlin Moran before, or at least I've not read her books. I have read articles that she's written in newspapers before, and I've always found her to be quite witty.
Yeah.
So I thought I would give it a go, and automatically when I pick a book, I turn it over like we probably all do and read the blurb on the back to see if we've made the right decision in picking it up in the first place. And the thing that attracted me to it was the fact that it was semi-autobiographical, and I knew Caitlin Moran was a similar age to me, and also that it was described as a coming-of-age novel. Now, when I think of coming-of-age novels, this will show my age now, I think of Adrian Mole, because he was like my heartthrob. I used to love reading the Adrian Mole books, but I do need to point out that in Caitlin Moran's version of growing up is totally different than what you find in Adrian Mole, and that became quite clear from the first sentence. There's lots of gritty language, that's putting it politely. There's quite a lot of profanity in the book, which ordinarily would put me off, but the fact that it was combined with obvious wit and sarcasm did carry it through, or else I would probably been tempted to put it down, because I'm getting quite prudish as I approach my middle age. But it was Moran's account of growing up in Wolverhampton in the 90s. She was part of quite a large family, and they lived in a council estate, and her father wasn't working, so they were all on benefits. So it didn't really reflect what my experiences were in the 90s, but I suppose what carried it was more of her feelings, you know, when you're at that age and you're trying to figure out what you want to be, how you want to look, how you want to be perceived. And I suppose it was that sort of rang bells with me, rather than her actual sort of circumstances of growing up and where she was living. So all in all, I did think it was a good read, and I would recommend it really probably to those that are a similar age to me, that because they will just automatically be transported back and start thinking about what they went through. And at the time, of course, you think it's frightfully important and you have to make some massive decisions and everything's really important, but I think it's quite nice to look back and think, oh God, you don't know how easy you had it. Your youth, you should enjoy your youth, but you can only say that when you're looking back retrospectively, can't you? Because at the time, obviously it's very important. But no, it was a good read, light-hearted, funny, but don't read it if you don't like swearing.
Okay, thanks for the warning. Well, I've been reading a book from Borrowbox, so an ebook, and it's called This Green and Pleasant Land, and it's by Aisha Malik. And it's about a man called Bilal. He lives on the south coast of England in a sleepy village with his wife and his stepson, and they're living a very contented middle-class lifestyle. And then the trouble starts when he goes back up to Birmingham, where he grew up, and his mum's dying, and she has a last wish, and that is that Bilal builds a mosque back in this quintessentially English village where he lives. So he's not a particularly devout Muslim or anything, but something happens that makes him think he is going to go forward with this. So he announces it at a parish council meeting, and the parish council are absolutely horrified by this, and the whole community are vehemently opposed to it, apart from maybe about 3 people. So it just unleashes all sorts of trouble within the community, becomes very divided. It's got themes in it of death, grief, community, identity, race, religion, faith, what it means to belong, and all that kind of thing. So it sounds like it's quite serious and heavy, but it's not like that. It's written in a very light, entertaining way. It's quite amusing. So although it's thought-provoking, it's done in quite a gentle way, which is kind of like where I'm at with my reading now. So I can identify with what you're saying, Annalise. You read maybe grittier stuff when you're younger, and the older you get, well, I look for more sort of heartwarming, uplifting things, maybe have, you know, some interesting psychology in it, but I don't go for the gritty, hard stuff. So this reminds me a little bit of books by David Nobbs. I don't know if anyone's read that. So if you like his type of thing, then you might like this. It's got quite a rich cast of characters from the village, and so yeah, it's an entertaining read, but thought-provoking. And then my baking is oat crumbles, which I have one here. And that has been adapted from a recipe that I got from my friend's auntie. I basically reduced the sugar in it because it did have quite a lot. And it's predominantly oats, lots of butter, and golden syrup, desiccated coconut, and yeah, they're like a big giant hobnob, really. So a little bit healthy because they've got oats in them. So yeah, that's what I've been baking. And Annalise, I forgot to ask you what you've been baking.
I know. I was going to be offended, Helen.
I'm sorry, I'd love to know.
As much as I love cookery books, and so I use them as more coffee table books, so you can look through them and almost salivate at like the hundreds of pictures. But the only thing I find a bit off-putting normally with cookery books is the amount of ingredients that seem to be needed for the smallest of things. So I tend to get a lot of my recipes from magazines, and thankfully, you know, we've got a great collection of e-magazines, so I literally just go through the e-magazines and take screenshots of the recipes once I've checked that there's no more than about a dozen ingredients. So my latest recipe is from the August edition of Good Housekeeping magazine, and it's for strawberry and white chocolate blondies. I'm not a big baker anyway. I haven't really got a sweet tooth, so the fact that it only had about half a dozen ingredients appealed. The fact that I'd got most of them in already obviously appealed, and the fact that it was a let's throw everything together in one bowl, mix it up and put it in the oven also appealed. Yes. The children liked it because it got white chocolate in, which for me made it a little bit too sweet. But we have adapted it. I've made it with raspberries instead of strawberries, and I have exchanged the white chocolate for dark chocolate, which is a bit more to my taste. With it having fresh fruit in, it does stay quite moist for several days if they last that long in the house, which is debatable a lot of the time. So yeah, and there was quite a few recipes in that August edition that I've screenshot, and I will consult at a later date. But it's my top tip, so it doesn't take up a lot of space on your tablet, and you get to keep the recipes that you're interested in doing. But yeah, I definitely give it a go if you like sweet brownie type cakes. Right,
okay, thank you. Well, thanks everyone. That brings us to the end of our first digital coffee morning. We hope you've enjoyed it. We've enjoyed sharing our books and our recipes with you, and we'd love it if you would share your reading recommendations and your recipes too. If you use the comments to post your recommendations, that would be brilliant. Thanks again for watching, and hopefully we'll see you again soon.